After my husband's funeral, my son dropped me on a remote road, saying, "This is where you get off. The house and business are mine now." I stood there, bag in hand, alone. No phone. No money. Then I realized I was not alone. I was free, but he had no idea what I had done before his father died. They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when that blood runs cold, turning the people you raised into vultures circling your life's work? I'm Eleanor, and this is how my own children tried to bury me before my husband was even in the ground. The air in our old farmhouse, usually filled with the comforting scent of David's fresh apple pie and my homemade bread, had grown heavy. It was thick with a different kind of silence, the unspoken fear, the quiet knowledge that my beloved David was dying, and a strange, unsettling chill that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. My full name is Eleanor Marie Blackwood. I became Eleanor Canton when I married David back in '81, and that's who I remained until just 3 weeks ago, the day after we laid him to rest. I'm 68 years old now. My hands ache with arthritis, but they still remember the rhythm of kneading sourdough, the kind our son, Kyle, used to beg for every Sunday morning. They remember the silken feel of our daughter Chloe's hair as I braided it for elementary school. I tell you this because I want you to understand. Before everything shattered, I was just a mother who truly believed she had raised good children. David's cancer, pancreatic, the silent executioner, it took 14 agonizing months. Just enough time to put your affairs in order, but never enough time to truly live with that knowledge. We kept it quiet at first, just between us. Our children were so busy with their own lives. Kyle, with his high-flying financial consulting career in Boston, which somehow always seemed to require him to miss every single major holiday. And Chloe, with her string of perpetually failing wellness businesses out in Denver, each one miraculously needing just one more investment from her dad. "They don't need this burden yet," David whispered one night, his eyes fixed on the bedroom ceiling, morphine slurring his words. "Let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow." I nodded, because I loved him, and I honored his wish. But deep down, I knew better. I knew our children. When they finally did arrive at our modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Millfield, Pennsylvania, the same home where they'd grown up, where David and I had poured our souls into building Canton family orchards from 20 neglected acres into one of the state's most respected organic fruit operations, they didn't come with comfort. They came with questions. About the will. "Mom, I'm just trying to be practical," Kyle said, his voice instantly taking on that condescending tone he'd perfected sometime around his first six-figure bonus. This was at the kitchen table, David asleep upstairs, barely clinging to life, when Kyle first dared to broach the subject. "The medical bills must be piling up. Have you two considered downsizing? The business can't be easy for you to manage alone." Kyle, who'd fled Millfield at 18, declaring small-town Pennsylvania as suffocating as the soil that had paid for his education. He'd visited only when absolutely necessary, usually opting for a hotel over his childhood bedroom because the country air aggravates my sinuses. But suddenly, during his father's final weeks, he developed a profound, almost aggressive interest in the family business that had once embarrassed him to his core. Chloe arrived 3 days later, trailing behind her 6 suitcases and the unmistakable scent of expensive failure. 5 wellness ventures in 8 years. Each one launched with her father's money. Each one abandoned the moment it required actual work. Yet, she hugged David with genuine, watery tears and slept beside his bed the night before he passed. That's why I still struggle, even now, with what came after. The funeral was small, exactly as David would have wanted. He was laid to rest on a hillside overlooking the orchards, where the spring blossoms were just beginning to unfurl. I stood between my children, Kyle's arms stiff around my shoulders, Chloe openly weeping into a monogrammed handkerchief I'd never seen before, as they lowered him into the ground. "He's at peace now," the pastor said. And I wondered if that was true, or just something people say when someone dies after such long, brutal suffering. David and I weren't religious, not in the traditional sense, but we'd maintained the social convention of occasional church attendance. Enough that Pastor Williams knew to focus on David's deep love for the land, rather than any promised heavenly reward. What I remember most vividly about that day was the crushing silence afterward. The house, once alive with laughter and the gentle hum of our lives, now echoed with it as neighbors dropped off casseroles and spoke in hushed, reverent tones about David's kindness, his unwavering integrity. How he'd helped old Mr. Peterson save his dairy farm during the recession, or hired the Wilson boys when they desperately needed summer work. Nobody mentioned how he'd built our business from absolute nothing, all while raising two children who seemed to have inherited absolutely none of his values. I made up the guest rooms. I told Kyle and Chloe that evening, as the last visitors finally left. I thought we could spend tomorrow going through some of your father's things together. About that, Mom, Kyle said, setting down his whiskey glass with a chilling precision that did remind me of his father. Chloe and I have been talking, and we think it's best if we settle things.
Quickly.
We both need to get back. Settle things. My blood ran cold. The estate, Chloe clarified, barely looking up from her phone. The house, the business. Kyle, and I need to figure out the next steps. I'd expected grief from my children. Perhaps a quiet evening reminiscing about their father. What I got instead was a boardroom meeting. Kyle actually opened his laptop right there on the dining table, the very table where we'd celebrated their birthdays, their graduations, their departures. Dad spoke to me about this last year, he mumbled, carefully avoiding my eyes. He was worried about you managing alone. The business needs modernization, investment. The house, it's too much for someone your age. My age. I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I've managed this orchard alongside your father for 40 years. And you've done wonderfully, Mom. Chloe chimed in, using the same saccharine voice she reserved for selling overpriced vitamins to desperate women. But it's time to think about your future. A retirement community would give you friends, activities. I have friends. I have activities. My voice sounded distant, alien even to my own ears. This is my home. It's all of our home, Kyle corrected, that condescending tone back. And Dad left the business to Chloe and me in the will. He wanted us to take care of you, but he knew the business needed younger management. I stared at my son, this stranger in expensive clothes, who thought he knew anything about the very earth that had fed him, the ancient trees his father had nursed through drought and blight and frost. Show me the will. He slid a document across the table. Not on our trusted family lawyer's letterhead, but something printed on Kyle's corporate stationery. David's signature, it looked wrong. Too perfect. Too steady for a man whose hands had trembled with pain for months. You had him sign this while he was on morphine, I accused, the rage that surged through me then so primal, so raw. I hadn't felt anything like it since I chased a fox trying to steal into our chicken coop when the children were small, wielding a broom with the kind of fury that comes only from protecting what's fiercely yours. He was lucid, Kyle insisted, though his eyes flickered. He wanted us to have a fresh start with the business. There's a developer interested in the land. For a luxury housing community, Chloe explained, her eyes bright with the prospect of money. They'll pay $7 million. Mom, we can all start fresh. Fresh. As if the life David and I had painstakingly built was something stale, something to be discarded. As if the legacy of Canton family orchards, our sustainable farming practices, our staunch refusal to sell to the big grocery chains that would squeeze our workers, our annual donation of 10% of our crop to local food banks, was nothing compared to the prospect of cookie-cutter homes for wealthy weekenders from Philadelphia. Your father would never sell this land for development, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I didn't sign anything. You don't need to, Kyle explained with practiced, infuriating patience. The business was in Dad's name. The house, too. Pennsylvania isn't a community property state. It was then I knew. They had planned this. Not just after David fell ill, but perhaps even before. How long had my son been waiting for his father to die, just so he could liquidate our entire life's work? How many times had Chloe called, not to check on David's health, but to ensure their monstrous plan was still in motion? I need time, I said, pushing myself up from the table. I'm going to bed. We'll discuss this tomorrow. But there would be no discussion. While I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with David for decades, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar creaks of our old farmhouse, my children were making their final preparations. Morning came with a smell of coffee, the expensive kind Kyle had brought from Boston because our local store brand was, apparently, undrinkable. I dressed slowly, my joints stiff with grief and age, and the cold, hard knowledge of what my children had become. When I came downstairs, they were waiting. Next to Chloe was a small suitcase I didn't recognize. We packed some essentials for you, Chloe said brightly, as if she were offering me a vacation. Kyle, and I thought we'd drive you to look at Sunny Pines today. It's a beautiful retirement community, just 2 hours from here. I'm not going to any retirement community, I replied, pouring myself a cup of the expensive coffee. This is my home. Mom, be reasonable, Kyle sighed, impatient. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here. I looked at my son then, truly looked at him, and saw nothing of David in his face. Nothing of the boy who had once followed his father through the orchard at dawn, asking endless, innocent questions about pollination and pruning. Nothing but a stranger who saw me as an inconvenience to be managed. I need my medication from the bathroom, I said quietly, and I'd like to take some photos. Sure, Mom, Chloe agreed, relief evident in her voice. Take whatever personal items you want. We can send the rest later. I moved through my home one last time. My fingers trailed along the worn banister David had sanded and varnished every 5 years. I touched the quilt my grandmother had made, draped across our bed. The window seat where I'd read stories to my children on countless rainy afternoons. In the bathroom, I retrieved my medications, but also slipped my passport and birth certificate from the hidden compartment in the medicine cabinet, the one David had built when we first worried about burglaries back in the late 80s. In our bedroom closet, behind David's collection of flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of him, I retrieved the small, fireproof box containing the one thing my children didn't know about. When I came downstairs, my purse felt heavier, but my heart, somehow, was lighter with resolve. Kyle was checking his watch. Ready? He asked. Not really a question. Ready. I nodded, allowing Chloe to take my arm as if I were already the infirm old woman they desperately wanted me to be. We drove in Kyle's rental car, a sleek black SUV with leather seats that stuck uncomfortably to the backs of my legs. I watched my home disappear through the rear window, memorizing every detail, the tender spring buds on the apple trees, the weathered red of our barn, the stone chimney David had rebuilt the summer before Kyle was born. We drove past Millfield's small downtown, past the elementary school where I'd volunteered for years, past the community center where I still taught quilting on Wednesday evenings. But instead of continuing onto the highway toward the larger towns where retirement communities clustered, Kyle turned onto County Road 27, a rural route that snaked through farmland before eventually connecting to the interstate. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto the shoulder beside an empty field. The engine idled, a low, menacing hum, as he turned to look at me. This is where you get off, Mom, he said, his voice eerily calm. The house and business are mine now. What? Chloe, at least, had the decency to look confused, even horrified. Kyle, what are you doing? What we discussed. Shut up, he snapped. Mom's not going to make this easy. She'll contest the will, make scenes, embarrass us with the developer. This is cleaner. She has her medication, some clothes. There's a gas station about 5 miles up. She can call one of her quilting friends. He reached across me and opened my door. Get out, Mom. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the child I'd loved, and found nothing. Then I turned to my daughter, whose wide eyes darted between us, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Chloe? I asked, but I already knew. She'd go along with him. She always had. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered, barely audible. It's just we need this money. I have debts. I nodded once, gathered my purse and the small suitcase they'd packed, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The spring air was cool, scented with fresh earth, and the promise of rain later. I stood there, clutching my bag, as Kyle drove away, without so much as a glance in the rearview mirror. Chloe's pale, tear-streaked face was visible through the rear window until they crested a hill and disappeared. No phone. No money. Or so they thought. Just my name and what they didn't know I still owned. And that's when I realized. I wasn't alone. I was free. Free from pretending these people deserved my love simply because I'd given them life. Free from the crushing weight of maternal obligation to children who saw me as nothing but an obstacle. I started walking, not toward the gas station Kyle had mentioned, but toward a future they couldn't possibly imagine. In my purse was my passport, my medication, and a deed. The original deed to 20 acres of land, in my maiden name, Blackwood. Purchased before I married David. Before Canton family orchards expanded. The most profitable 20 acres as it happened. And it included the water rights that any developer would absolutely need. My children thought they'd left me with nothing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. So incredibly wrong. The walk to town took nearly 2 hours. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn for my husband's funeral, were definitely not made for country roads. By the time I reached Miller's Gas and Grocery at the edge of Millfield, my feet were blistered and the afternoon sun had burned my neck. I didn't care. Pain has a way of clarifying things. And with each step, my purpose had crystallized. I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I sat on the bench outside, watching pickups and sedans come and go. Normal people, living normal lives, who had no idea that Eleanor Canton, who judged their apple pies at the county fair for 20 years, had just been abandoned like roadkill by her own flesh and blood. Mrs. Canton? I looked up to see Ray Miller himself, third-generation owner of the store, wiping his hands on his apron. You all right? You're looking a bit peaked. Just resting, Ray. Been a long day. He nodded, glancing at my small suitcase. Real sorry about David, Mrs. Canton. He was a good man. Yes, he was. I straightened my spine. Ray, could I use your phone? I seem to have forgotten mine. Of course, you can. He led me inside, past the beer coolers and snack aisles, to the small office behind the counter. Take your time. I didn't call any of my quilting friends, as Kyle had so thoughtfully suggested. I called Arthur Hargrove, our family lawyer of 30 years. Eleanor, I tried reaching you yesterday. I was surprised not to see you at the reading. My hand tightened on the receiver. What reading? Arthur was silent for a moment. The will reading. Your son presented a document, but I had concerns. I've been trying to contact you. I've been indisposed, I said, my voice steady despite the molten rage building inside me. Arthur, I need your help, and I need discretion. You have both. My office. 1 hour. I'll be there. I bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash I kept hidden in a secret compartment of my purse, emergency money David had insisted we both carry after getting stranded with a flat tire years ago. I also purchased a bottle of water and a sandwich I had no appetite for. Ray refused to take my money. Eleanor, you need anything else, you just ask. His kindness nearly broke me. Nearly. But I hadn't cried when they lowered David into the ground, and I wouldn't cry now. Not yet. Arthur's law office occupied the second floor of a charming Victorian on Main Street. When his secretary, Helen, saw me, her eyes widened in concern. Mrs. Canton, Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. She hurried from behind her desk. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, Helen. Thank you. Arthur met me at his office door, his tall frame stooped with age, but his eyes as sharp as ever. He'd been a year behind David in school, had handled our business incorporation, our wills, every legal detail of our lives. Eleanor. He guided me to a plush leather chair, then sat not behind his imposing desk, but in the chair beside me, offering a comforting presence. Tell me what's happening. So I did. The horrifying conversation after the funeral, the suspicious will, the cold, calculated drive, and the abandonment. With each detail, Arthur's expression darkened, growing grimmer. The will they showed you, he said when I finished, his voice tight, was not the will Nicholas and I prepared last year. Their document is a forgery. I suspected as much. I opened my purse and retrieved the fireproof box. From it, I withdrew the deed to the original 20 acres. They don't know about this. Arthur examined the deed, a slow nod spreading across his face. Smart. Very smart. You two were always thinking ahead. David suggested putting this portion in my maiden name when we first expanded. Insurance, he called it, in case the business ever failed. And now it was insurance of another, far more personal kind. Arthur placed the deed carefully on his desk. What do you want to do, Eleanor? I met his eyes, my gaze steady. I want my home back. I want the business my husband built. And I want my children to understand exactly what they've done. Arthur didn't flinch at the coldness in my voice. Instead, he nodded. Let's start with a place for you to stay tonight. My sister's B&B has a vacancy. Tomorrow, we'll begin the legal work. No. I shook my head, my jaw set. I need to move faster than that. The developer is closing next week. A flash of understanding dawned in Arthur's eyes. You're not planning to just go through the courts. Courts are for people with time, Arthur. I have a better idea. That night, in the floral-papered comfort of Rose Hill bed and breakfast, I made my first call. Not to my children. They could wonder where I was, whether I'd reached town or collapsed on the roadside. My call was to Frank Winters, the regional manager of Pennsylvania Trust Bank, where Canton Family Orchards had done business for decades. Mrs. Canton, I'm so sorry about your husband. Thank you, Frank. I'm calling because I've discovered some concerning transactions, and I need your help to protect what's left of our business. My second call was to Peter Adams, the agricultural extension agent who'd worked with us for 15 years. Eleanor, I was at the funeral, but didn't get to speak with you. I know, Peter, it's been chaotic. Listen, I need information about a potential development on farmland in the county. My third call was to Rebecca Delaney, editor of the Millfield Gazette and David's second cousin. Ellie, how are you holding up? I've been worried. I'm managing, Rebecca. But I think there's a story you might be interested in. About developers, protected agricultural land, and inheritance fraud. By midnight, I had made 7 calls. Each one a carefully placed strand in the web I was weaving. Outside my window, the quiet streets of Millfield slept peacefully, blissfully unaware that Eleanor Canton, always the peacemaker, always the nurturer, was planning a war. In the morning, I met Arthur at his office, armed with a legal pad full of meticulously scribbled notes. I need you to freeze the business accounts, I told him, my voice steady. And I need you to file an emergency injunction on any sale of the property based on the fraudulent will. Arthur reviewed my notes, his eyebrows rising slowly. This is comprehensive. I had 40 years with David. I reminded him. I know every contract, every client, every single detail of that business. I leaned forward, my gaze locking with his. And I'm going to use all of it. Your children won't take this quietly. I'm counting on it. By noon, the pieces were in motion. Arthur had filed the emergency injunction. Frank had frozen the business accounts, pending investigation of suspicious activity. Peter had contacted the Environmental Board about protected wetlands on the proposed development site, wetlands that, by pure coincidence, happened to be on my 20 acres. I sat in Arthur's office, watching the clock tick toward 1 p.m., the exact moment my children would discover that their carefully constructed plan had just hit its first, devastating obstacle. My phone rang, the new prepaid one whose number they shouldn't have known. But Arthur had made sure they'd gotten it. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice calm, almost detached. This is Eleanor. Mom. Kyle's voice crackled through the line, barely contained fury boiling beneath the surface. What have you done? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I've only just begun. Mom, be reasonable. Kyle's voice hardened. You can't just freeze accounts and file injunctions. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our deal? Your deal? I corrected, my tone icy. Not mine. Not your father's. Where are you? Chloe cut in, her voice shrill and panicked. Kyle had clearly put me on speaker. "We've been worried sick." The lie hung between us, thick and poisonous. They hadn't called the police, hadn't contacted friends. They'd been too busy finalizing their betrayal. "Worried that I survived?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Worried that I didn't conveniently disappear?" "That's not fair," Chloe wailed. "Kyle made a mistake." "Shut up, Chloe," Kyle snapped. I smiled into the phone, already sensing their fragile alliance fracturing. "Listen carefully. I'm giving you one chance to walk away with something. Withdraw your fraudulent will. Sign the business and house back to me. In return, I'll give you each a one-time payment of $50,000. After that, we're done. Completely." Kyle laughed. An ugly, hollow sound. "You're delusional. You have nothing. The will is legal." "The will is a forgery," Arthur interjected, leaning forward so his voice carried clearly through the speakerphone on his desk. "As the lawyer who drafted David Canton's actual will, I can testify to that." Silence stretched across the line, heavy and suffocating. "You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires. And I proceed with fraud charges." I hung up before they could respond. Arthur leaned back in his chair. "You realize they'll probably refuse. I'm counting on it." I stood, gathering my purse. Now I need to visit the bank in person. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, urgent phone calls, and quiet meetings in back offices throughout Millfield. People who had known me for decades, known us, David and me, stepped up with information, signatures, and unwavering support. Not out of pity, but out of deep respect. And perhaps a touch of relish at seeing the Canton children, who had abandoned their hometown for shinier places, finally get their comeuppance. By evening, I'd moved into a small apartment above Brenda's bakery. The owner, Brenda Brennan, had been my friend since our children started kindergarten together. "Stay as long as you need," she said, pressing the key into my palm. "That boy of yours never did right by this town, or by you and David." I slept surprisingly well that night, lulled by the familiar, comforting smells of bread and pastry rising from below. In the morning, I dressed in clothes Brenda had lent me, a pair of jeans and a sweater that fit well enough, and prepared for war. At precisely 9 a.m., when the deed office opened, I filed paperwork asserting my ownership of the original 20 acres. This property included the main house, the barn, and most critically, the water access that any developer would desperately need. At 10 a.m., I met with the Agricultural Board about conservation easements David and I had quietly put in place years ago, restrictions that would make development nearly impossible, even if Kyle somehow managed to sell. At noon, I sat with Rebecca in the Millfield Gazette office, providing her with irrefutable documentation for a story that would run with the headline, "Local Orchard at Center of Inheritance Dispute. Developer plans threaten protected agricultural land." By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing again. "The offer's off the table," I said by way of greeting. "Mom, you're making a terrible mistake." Kyle's voice had lost its edge of superiority, replaced by something closer to raw panic. "The developer's lawyers are threatening to sue if we can't deliver as promised." "That sounds like your problem." "Our problem," Chloe broke in, her voice ragged. "Mom, please. I used the advance to pay off some debts. If this falls through, I'll be ruined." "You should have thought of that before leaving me on the side of the road," I retorted, my voice cutting. "That was Kyle's idea," she cried, attempting to shift blame. "I didn't know until we were already driving." The betrayal between them gave me no satisfaction. Nothing about this gave me satisfaction, only a cold, necessary sense of justice being served. "The bank statements show you withdrew $50,000 3 days before your father's funeral, Chloe," I continued, my voice clinical, detached. "Planning your fresh start already, were you?" She began to sob, those dramatic, heaving cries I'd heard countless times when she didn't get her way. "It's too late for tears," I stated. "Arthur will send over the paperwork. You both sign, renouncing all claims to Canton Family Orchards and the house. In return, I won't press charges for fraud, attempted elder abuse, and theft." "And the $50,000? Kyle asked, his businessman's mind still calculating, still grasping. That offer expired. I replied simply. You get to stay out of jail. That's all. I hung up, placed the phone on Arthur's desk, and stared out the window at the town where I'd spent my entire adult life. Across the street, the farmers' market was setting up, just as it did every Thursday. People moved about their business, greeting neighbors, examining produce, living normal lives where children didn't abandon mothers on roadsides. They'll fight, Arthur said, setting a fresh cup of tea beside me. Let them. I didn't touch the tea. I have one more call to make. I dialed a number I'd memorized decades ago, but rarely used. Richard, it's Eleanor Canton. I think it's time I called in that favor. Richard Wilson had been David's roommate at Penn State before either of them met me. They'd remained lifelong friends, even after Richard moved to Philadelphia to start what would become one of the largest real estate law firms in the state. 30 years ago, David had loaned Richard money when his first firm collapsed, money that helped him rebuild a practice now renowned for destroying predatory developers. Eleanor. His voice was warm with immediate recognition. I've been meaning to call since I heard about David. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Richard. I need your help with the situation. I explained everything. The forgery, the abandonment, the developer. Richard listened without interruption. And when I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. I'll be in Millfield tomorrow morning, he finally said, his voice tight, with controlled anger. These developers, Platinum Acres, they've been on our radar. Eleanor, what they're planning violates at least 6 environmental regulations. We've been looking for a way to stop them. And now you have one. Yes, I could hear him shuffling papers. Don't sign anything before I get there. And Eleanor, I'm sorry about your children. I stopped having children 3 days ago. I replied, my voice flat. Now I just have adversaries. That night, I sat in Brenda's kitchen as she closed the bakery, drinking tea and watching her prepare dough for the morning. You should try to eat something, she said, nodding toward the sandwich she'd made me. You need your strength. I'm not hungry. I hadn't had an appetite since David died. Food was fuel now, nothing more. Heard Chloe's staying at the Millfield Inn, Brenda continued, kneading with practiced, rhythmic movements. Kyle's still at the house. People are talking. Let them talk. The small-town grapevine had always annoyed my children, but now it served me. Every move they made, I knew about it within hours. Rebecca's article runs tomorrow, Brenda went on. Front page. Got a call from the Philadelphia Inquirer, too. They want to pick up the story. Something about the developer having trouble with other projects. I nodded, unsurprised. Richard's call had confirmed what I'd suspected. Platinum Acres had a pattern of targeting vulnerable landowners, particularly the elderly, with promises they never intended to keep. Did I do the right thing, raising them the way we did? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Not out of sentimentality, but a genuine, agonizing curiosity about where I had failed. Brenda's hands stilled in the dough. She looked at me, her gaze gentle, but firm. You and David were good parents, Eleanor. Some people just turn out rotten, no matter the soil they're planted in. I accepted her answer with a nod, pushing away the useless question. It didn't matter anymore. The past was buried with David. Only the future, and my relentless pursuit of justice, remained. Morning brought Richard Wilson, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Canton Orchard profits, striding into Arthur's office with 2 associates trailing behind him. Eleanor. He embraced me briefly, a rare moment of warmth, then immediately turned to business. We've filed injunctions against Platinum Acres in 3 counties already. Now we add yours to the list. For the next 2 hours, I watched a master at work. Richard didn't just understand law, he wielded it like a scalpel, precise and devastating. By noon, he had drafted documents that would not only block the sale but potentially trigger a state investigation into the developer's shady practices. Your children's signatures, he said, sliding papers across Arthur's desk. We need them to officially renounce their claims based on the fraudulent will. Arthur says they're refusing. They'll sign, I said with absolute certainty. They just need the proper motivation. I pulled out my phone and made another call. This one to Gary Winters, Frank's son, and the assistant district attorney for the county. Gary, it's Eleanor Canton. I'd like to discuss pressing criminal charges. Richard raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, but said nothing as I arranged a meeting for later that afternoon. When I hung up, he nodded approvingly. You always were tougher than David gave you credit for. David knew exactly how tough I was. I corrected, a faint, bitter smile touching my lips. He just never thought I'd need to use it against our own children. Just after 2 p.m., my phone rang again. Kyle, his voice clipped and formal. We'll sign the papers, but we want something in writing saying you won't pursue charges. I already offered that yesterday, I reminded him, my voice devoid of emotion. The terms have changed. What do you want? He sounded utterly defeated, which, I noted, gave me no pleasure. Be at Arthur's office at 4 p.m. Bring Chloe. I'll lay out my terms then. When they arrived, I was already seated between Richard and Arthur, a united front of legal firepower. My children looked terrible. Kyle unshaven, his expensive shirt wrinkled. Chloe with smeared makeup and her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Neither could meet my eyes. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from us. This won't take long. Richard slid the documents across the table. Mrs. Canton has agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the forged will, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft of business assets worth approximately $12 million. In exchange, you will both sign these papers acknowledging the will was fraudulent, renouncing all claims to Canton Family Orchards, the residential property, and all associated assets. Kyle skimmed the document, his face paling further. This says we forfeit our inheritance entirely. Yes, I said simply. But that's, Chloe began. Exactly what you tried to do to me. I finished for her, my voice unwavering. With one difference. I'm offering you a legal way out, not abandonment on a roadside. Mom, please. Chloe's voice cracked. I know we made a terrible mistake, but stop. I held up my hand. This isn't a negotiation. Sign, or I walk across the street to the DA's office and file charges. Gary Winters is waiting for my call. At the mention of the assistant district attorney, Kyle's already pale face went ashen. He knew Gary from high school, another local boy he'd looked down on, who had now definitively surpassed him. You'd really do that, he whispered, a genuine disbelief in his voice, as if the woman who had made his favorite cookies and bandaged his childhood scrapes couldn't possibly be this cold, this unforgiving. The woman who would have forgiven you anything died on County Road 27. I replied evenly, my voice a steel trap. You left her in the dust. Kyle looked away first, then, with a heavy sigh, reached for the pen Arthur offered. His signature was shaky but legible. Chloe took longer, tears silently dropping onto the paper as she signed her name, her entire body trembling. What happens now? She asked in a small, broken voice. Now you leave Millfield, I said, gathering the signed documents. Both of you.
Today.
If I see either of you in this town again, I will press charges, regardless of what you've signed. And the developer? Kyle asked, a last, desperate attempt at salvaging something. Richard smiled thinly. Platinum Acres will be formally notified that the property is not, and was never, for sale. They'll also be receiving notification of our intent to file suit for their part in what appears to be a conspiracy to defraud a widow. They left without another word, shoulders slumped in utter defeat. I watched through Arthur's window as they walked separately to their cars, Kyle to his rental, Chloe to her flashy red convertible that David had, ironically, helped her buy last year. Neither looked back at the office. Neither looked at each other. It's done, Arthur said quietly, placing the documents securely in his safe. But it wasn't done. Not yet. The legal battle was won, but the war, my war, had one final act. I need a ride, I told Richard. Where to? Home. The Canton farmhouse looked exactly as I'd left it 4 days earlier. White clapboard siding glowing in the late afternoon sun. David's rocking chair still on the front porch, where he'd spent his last mobile days. watching the orchard bloom. Only Kyle's rental car in the driveway marked any change. "Want me to come in with you?" Richard asked as he pulled up behind it.
No.
"This part I do alone." Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I moved through the first floor, noting small disturbances. Kyle's laptop on the dining table, a half-empty whiskey glass beside it, muddy shoes by the door that he would never have left there when he lived here. "Kyle," I called out, my voice echoing through the rooms that had witnessed 40 years of my life. No answer. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister David had carved by hand our first year in the house. At the top, I noticed our bedroom door ajar, light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open. Kyle stood by the window, staring out at the orchard, his back to me. The room had been ransacked, dresser drawers pulled out, closet doors open, David's possessions scattered across the bed we'd shared for 4 decades. "Looking for something?" I asked coldly. He didn't startle, didn't turn around. "I know there has to be more. Dad wouldn't leave everything to you. Your father trusted me, something you clearly never learned to do." Now he did turn, his face twisted with something between rage and desperation. "You've destroyed everything. The deal's collapsed. Chloe's creditors are calling. My firm is investigating why I took so much time off without explanation. Actions have consequences," I replied simply. "Is that what this is? A lesson?" He laughed bitterly. "Not a lesson," I corrected, my voice firm. "Justice." I moved to the bookshelf and pulled out an old, leather-bound copy of The Rose Walden, David's favorite book, the one he'd read aloud to me during long winter evenings when the children were asleep. From between its pages, I withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father wrote this for you the week before he died. I was going to give it to you after the funeral before I understood what you really were." Kyle reached for it, but I held it back. "Did you even grieve for him? Or were you too busy planning how to profit from his death?" Something flashed across his face. Perhaps shame. Perhaps just annoyance at being caught. "I loved Dad. You loved what he provided," I corrected. "Security. Status. The safety net for your riskier ventures. What was it this time, Kyle? Another bad investment? Gambling debts?" His silence was answer enough. "Your father built something that would have sustained generations if you'd had the patience to nurture it." I placed the envelope on the dresser. "Instead, you tried to sell it for quick cash. The orchard business is dying," he snapped. "Dad was too stubborn to see it, too tied to outdated ways. The development would have made you rich, while destroying everything your father valued." "Everything I valued," I finished, my voice rising slightly. "You could have had a comfortable retirement, a condo in Florida. No worries, except the worry of living with the knowledge that I'd allowed my husband's legacy to be bulldozed for vacation homes." Kyle shook his head, as if I were the one being utterly unreasonable. Even now, he couldn't understand. "Take the letter and go," I said, my voice final. "Read it or don't. But either way, this is the last time you'll set foot in this house." He snatched the envelope and pushed past me without another word. I listened to his heavy footsteps on the stairs, the slam of the front door, the engine of his rental car roaring to life. Only when the sound had faded completely did I allow myself to sit on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the wreckage of Kyle's final violation. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since that moment on County Road 27, when I realized my children had become strangers. Instead, I began to put the room back in order, folding David's flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of him, gathering scattered photographs, restoring order to the chaos my son had left behind. As darkness fell, I moved to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, carrying it to the front porch, where I settled into David's rocking chair. Above me, stars began to emerge in the clear spring sky. Below, the orchard stretched into darkness, the trees we'd planted together now mature and strong. My phone rang. Arthur, checking on me. "I'm home," I told him. "Kyle's gone." "And you're all right there alone?" "I've been alone since David died," I replied, a profound truth settling over me. "The difference is now I know it." 3 months later, I sat in the same chair, watching the summer sun set over an orchard heavy with ripening fruit. The harvest would be good this year, perhaps our best ever. Not that I would handle it alone. The new manager I'd hired, Peter Adams's daughter, Sarah, had already proven herself more than capable. My phone chimed with a text from Brenda. "Front page again. Thought you'd want to see." The attached image showed the Philadelphia Inquirer's business section. Platinum Acres CEO indicted in fraud scheme. The subheading mentioned Canton Family Orchards as the case that had triggered the investigation, ultimately revealing a pattern of elder exploitation spanning 3 states. I set the phone aside, feeling nothing but a quiet satisfaction. Justice, not revenge. Or perhaps in this case, they were the same thing after all. Another text arrived. This one from an unknown number. "Mom, please. It's been months. Can we talk?" I deleted it without replying, just as I deleted the 12 before it. Chloe had begun reaching out after the scandal broke, after her creditors took her car, her condo, everything she owned to cover debts she'd accumulated expecting the windfall from the orchard sale. Kyle never contacted me at all. Though Arthur heard he'd been asked to resign from his firm when his connection to the fraud investigation came to light. My children were learning the hardest lesson of all, that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. As darkness settled over the orchard, I rocked gently, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, a distant owl, the steady creak of the chair against weathered boards. In my lap lay a notebook where I'd begun sketching plans for Canton Family Orchard's future, a farm-to-table restaurant in the old barn, educational programs for local schools, expansion of our organic practices. David would have loved these ideas. We discussed similar dreams before his illness consumed our conversations with treatments and pain management. "I'm doing it, David," I whispered to the night air. "Everything we planned. Everything they tried to destroy." Tomorrow, I would meet with the lawyer handling the formation of the David Canton Agricultural Scholarship, a fund for local students pursuing sustainable farming, funded by the profits my children had tried to steal. Next week, I would host the first community harvest dinner, inviting the neighbors and friends who had rallied around me when I needed them most. And in the quiet evenings, I would sit here in David's chair, watching over the orchard we had built. The legacy that would continue without our children. Strong and enduring as the trees themselves. Not alone after all. Just free freedom. It's a word we throw around so easily, isn't it? But to truly feel it, to breathe it in after suffocating under the weight of expectation and misplaced love, that's a different kind of liberation altogether. That night, sitting in David's old rocking chair, the stars emerging like tiny pinpricks of hope in the vast, inky canvas above me, I realized I wasn't just free from something. I was free to be something more. More myself than I'd been in years. The world had shifted on its axis, but for the first time in a long time, my world felt right side up. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Sarah, Peter Adams's daughter, arrived a week later, practically buzzing with energy and fresh ideas. She was in her late 20s, a recent agricultural college graduate with a bright, curious mind and a passion for sustainable farming that mirrored David's own. Seeing her walk through the orchards, her eyes alight with the same wonder and respect David always had for the land, was like watching a ghost laid to rest. She didn't see me as a fragile widow to be managed. She saw me as a seasoned farmer, a mentor, a partner. That in itself was a profound healing. We spent hours together, walking the rows of trees, discussing everything from pest control to market strategies. Sarah brought modern techniques and social media savvy, things I'd never quite grasped. I, in turn, offered her decades of practical wisdom, the nuances of the Millfield soil, the quirks of our specific apple varietals, and the unspoken language of the orchard. It was a beautiful exchange, a symbiosis that breathed new life, not just into the business, but into me. I started carrying my notebook again, not just for sketching plans, but for jotting down observations, new ideas, questions for Sarah. My mind, which had felt clouded by grief and then by the bitter conflict, was finally clear, sharp. The first community harvest dinner was a resounding success. We held it right here, in the main barn, transformed by fairy lights and the warm glow of lanterns. Brenda catered, bringing her famous apple tarts and savory quiches. Ray Miller donated drinks. Arthur and Richard even made an appearance, looking a bit out of place in their suits amidst the hay bales and gingham tablecloths, but their presence was a silent testament to the support I'd found. Neighbors, old friends, even some new faces from the local farming co-op filled the barn with laughter and conversation. It was a tangible reaffirmation of what Canton Family Orchards truly meant to this community. It wasn't just a business, it was a cornerstone. It was family, just not the one I'd been born into. I watched Sarah, her cheeks flushed with excitement, chatting animatedly with guests about the season's yield. I saw the pride in her eyes, the genuine connection she was forming with the land and the people. And a warmth spread through me that no amount of money or forced family could ever buy. This was the legacy David had wanted, a legacy of stewardship, community, and honest hard work. And it was thriving, not despite what my children had done, but almost because of it. Their greed had forced me to rediscover the core of what truly mattered. The lawsuit against Platinum Acres, thanks to Richard and his firm, became a landmark case. It wasn't just about my land anymore. It became about protecting agricultural lands across the state from predatory developers. Richard called me regularly, sometimes just for updates, sometimes to ask my opinion on how a particular ruling might impact small-scale farmers. He even brought a couple of his junior lawyers out to the orchard one weekend, giving them a tour, explaining the delicate balance of ecosystems we maintained. He said seeing the real, tangible impact of what they were fighting for helped them connect to the human side of the law. I think it helped him, too. Seeing the orchard flourish, knowing he'd played a part in saving it, seemed to bring him a quiet satisfaction that went beyond legal victories. As the case gained traction, local and even national news outlets began covering it. Rebecca Delaney at the Millfield Gazette became a fierce advocate, her articles not just reporting facts, but weaving in the human story, the fight for family farms against corporate greed. The Philadelphia Inquirer, as Brenda had hinted, did pick up the story, then the New York Times, casting an even wider net on Platinum Acres' questionable practices. It was a slow, meticulous unraveling, but the fraud scheme they uncovered was far grander than even Richard had initially suspected. More indictments followed. More victims came forward. It was a vindication, not just for me, but for every small landowner who had been trampled underfoot by their ambition. The Nicholas Canton Agricultural Scholarship also started taking shape. I met with a local college board, set up an endowment with Arthur's help, using a substantial portion of the settlement money from Platinum Acres, money my children had never gotten their hands on. The first recipient was a bright young woman from a neighboring dairy farm, struggling to afford tuition. Her gratitude was so genuine, so pure, it brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't about erasing Kyle and Chloe, but about affirming David's values, about nurturing the next generation of farmers who understood the sacred trust of the land. It was a way to honor David's memory not with grief, but with growth and opportunity. Sometimes, in the quiet solitude of the farmhouse, an old memory would surface. A childhood laugh, a shared secret, a Christmas morning, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of something akin to sadness would stir. Not regret, not anymore, but a hollow ache for what could have been. For the family I had imagined, the children I thought I had. But those moments were quickly overshadowed by the vibrant reality of my present. By Sarah's infectious optimism, by Brenda's steadfast friendship, by the drone of a tractor in the distance, by the sheer, undeniable beauty of the orchard, alive and thriving. Chloe's texts, when they came, grew more desperate, more demanding. After her creditors took everything, she tried to leverage her starving artist persona for crowdfunding, but her history of failed ventures and the lingering whispers of the family scandal made it a hard sell. She emailed, called from different numbers, begged for money, for forgiveness, for a place to stay. Each time, I read the messages, a flicker of something almost mechanical within me. My heart remained unmoved. The woman who would have rushed to her side, who would have mortgaged everything to save her daughter. That woman had died on County Road 27. I was a different person now, a stronger one, forged in the fires of betrayal. Deleting her messages was no longer an act of anger, but one of self-preservation, a quiet assertion of my boundaries. Kyle's silence, on the other hand, was complete. Arthur occasionally heard snippets through his legal network. Kyle had indeed been forced to resign from his firm, his reputation in tatters. He tried to start his own consulting business, but found doors closed everywhere he turned. The high flyer had crashed, and from what Arthur understood, he was struggling immensely. There was no joy in hearing it, no triumphant gloating. Just a detached understanding that consequences, however painful, eventually catch up to everyone. I recognized the justice in it, but the part of me that was once a mother simply saw a broken man. And I felt nothing, which I realized was another form of freedom. Freedom from the emotional manipulation, from the never-ending cycle of disappointment. The farm-to-table restaurant in the old barn became my passion project. Sarah was instrumental, helping me design the layout, source local ingredients, and even craft a menu that celebrated the orchard's produce. We hired local chefs, young, enthusiastic culinary artists who shared our vision for sustainable, seasonal dining. The grand opening, nearly 2 years after David's passing, was another milestone. The barn, once a place of storage and quiet work, now buzzed with the joyful chatter of diners, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of roasted apples and fresh herbs. It was named, simply, David's Table. A tribute, not to a static memory, but to a living, breathing legacy. The success of David's Table and the growing reputation of Canton Family Orchards as a model for sustainable agriculture brought unexpected visitors. Food critics, agricultural journalists, even a documentary film crew who wanted to tell our story. I found myself, an ordinary woman who had once thought her life was winding down, standing in front of cameras, articulate and passionate, sharing David's vision and my own journey of resilience. I spoke not of betrayal directly, but of finding strength, of the deep connection to the land and the power of community. I spoke of legacy, of rebuilding, and of the profound freedom that comes from standing firm in your own truth. One crisp autumn evening, about 3 years after David's death, I was sitting on the porch again, watching the last golden rays of sunlight paint the leaves of the apple trees. The air was cool, carrying the sweet scent of ripe fruit and wood smoke from the restaurant's hearth. Sarah was inside, finishing up paperwork, humming softly. The scholarship fund was fully endowed and already supporting several students. David's Table was booked solid for weeks, and the orchards were flourishing, producing some of the finest organic apples in the region. My phone chimed. It was Arthur. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I just got off the phone with Robert Wilson. Platinum Acres was fully dissolved today. The last of their assets liquidated. The CEO is serving time. It's truly over." I listened, a deep sigh escaping me. A chapter truly closed. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my voice. "Thank you for everything." I hung up and leaned back in David's rocking chair, feeling the familiar, comforting creak. It had been a long road, paved with grief, anger, and the bitter dust of betrayal. But I had walked it. I had not just survived. I had thrived. I had rebuilt. And in doing so, I had forged a new life, richer and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. The legacy wasn't just David's anymore. It was ours. Mine. It was in the trees, in the rich soil, in the hands of the young people we supported, in the laughter filling the barn. It was in the quiet strength I found within myself, the knowing that I was enough just as I was. Free. Truly, deeply free. From the ghost of what should have been, and fully present in the vibrant reality of what is. I was whole, and I was home. This journey, this unexpected twist in the twilight of my life, taught me that while we can't choose our family, we can choose our legacy. We can choose what we nurture, what we protect, and what we let go of. And sometimes, The hardest goodbyes are the ones that lead us to the most beautiful hellos. To ourselves, to our purpose, and to the true meaning of a life well lived. It's a hard truth, but a liberating one. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced such a profound betrayal, or if you've found your own kind of freedom in unexpected places, I'd love to hear your experiences. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story shared helps us all understand the intricate tapestry of life a little better.